Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria, and
Zach Evans.
Zach Evans from Destrier. So I've been doing some filming today with horses. Zach is a specialist in mounted combat, jousting specifically, but we're here talking about armour, or rather how a man shall be armed. So if you haven't heard of it, it's an English text of the late 15th century, I believe, mid to late 15th century. How a man shall be armed at his ease for fighting on foot, basically in armour. We don't fully know the context of it. We don't know, it's probably for tournament fighting or knightly duel. But some of this could translate to battlefield preparation as well. It seems to be a person's advice to maybe a young knight, that kind of thing. And it's been written down in a manuscript, preserved, thankfully. I think it's in the British Library. But we don't know who wrote it, and we don't know specifically who they wrote it for or their exact intended purpose. But nevertheless, it's got some fascinating details in it. Now, when we look at the arms and accoutrements and armour of this period, often we look at artwork, we look at written texts, we look at the surviving armour itself, and in very occasional circumstances, the bits of clothing and things that go with the armour. But in this case, we've got some very specific details, haven't we?
Yeah.
That tell us some very interesting things that some of these I don't ever recall seeing in any other source, in any other language.
And it's all online, so you can go in and read the original text. It's been just
absolutely
search it online.
And I should also say at this point as well that this is a two-part video that I'm doing with Zach, and you can find the other part of this video about some other advice from how a man shall be armed on Zach's channel, and I'll put a link below, okay, to Zach's channel, so go and check that out. So we've got a piece of text here, and Zach pulled this out, so thanks to Zach for doing that, and we're going to look through it. So what I'll do is I'll read quickly through it, and we'll pick out a few key points that we think are worth focusing on and talking a little about. So it says, this section says, "And he shall have no shirt upon him except for a doublet of fustian lined with satin cut full of holes." Well, let's just stop there for a second.
Yeah.
So just in that one sentence, we've actually got several interesting points, haven't we?
Yeah, so the shirt just seems to be, this is a replica medieval shirt. They're pretty basic. Basically, they're worn to stop sweat and other things grubbiness getting onto your more expensive clothes, because it's much easier to wash a single layer of linen than it is to wash a full doublet.
Can we see the doublet? So, to explain for you who don't know, when underneath armour, what you actually wear is an arming doublet. Now, contrary to lots of people's perception, you don't wear a load of padding at this time, do you?
No.
So plate armour of the 15th century, pretty much the whole of the 15th century, is designed to be close fitting. Okay, so the armour is close fitting, so the doublet that goes underneath it needs to be close fitting. You can't fit lots of padding underneath this kind of armour and still expect to move in a good way, and also you'll overheat. So as you can see, this arming doublet's thin, isn't it?
It is very thin. I think it's 3 layers in most areas, 4 at the parts where it needs to be strongest.
So it's thin, but it's strong.
Yes, absolutely. And you could actually probably go to 3 layers all over if it wasn't for the fact that I wanted a nice silk casing on it. So most of it is this. The first layer is the silk, which as a knight, you need to be flashy. So you do wear those things, but it's basically a shell. It doesn't have much of a structural element to it.
Protective kind of, But silk is quite strong in itself, so it's a relatively strong
it's
material,
not very
isn't it?
thick silk is what I'm saying. This particular one.
Right,
You could and then it's got fustian as well.
Okay, and what is fustian?
So that has been a very difficult question to ask for a long time. We're pretty sure it's a mix of cotton and linen.
Okay.
And
so cotton was relatively newly introduced in the 15th century, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So everything before that pretty much had been either wool or linen.
Yeah.
So cotton, very strong fibres.
Yes.
And as I understand it, so linen later on became seen as quite an expensive material, but earlier on, cotton was more expensive and linen was cheaper.
Yeah.
So mixing them together kind of gives you some of the benefits with some cost saving.
Yeah,
maybe.
so I think it's not so much a cost thing at this stage, because we're looking at a document that's suggesting it, and it's a knight.
Yeah.
And the other thing
yeah.
he's suggesting is satin. So
Yeah.
So we're probably not looking at that. But what I think, from what I've heard, is that at the time they couldn't make cotton in very long lengths.
Okay.
So they couldn't use it for both the warp and the weft.
Okay.
They could only use it for the shorter. I can't remember whether that's the warp or the weft.
Okay.
In case you're an expert in weaving, then you can leave a comment and tell us. I'm just going by what my tailor has told me. But basically, yeah, they couldn't produce it in long enough lengths to use it for both warp and weft, whereas linen they could. So
Okay.
to get cotton in, they could only use it in a fustian at this stage.
So the interesting things here in this sentence are that there's no shirt to be worn underneath the doublet.
Yep.
So that's the unusual thing. And
Get rid of that.
remember, when you're studying history, often if something's recorded, it's recorded because it's unusual, not usual. So the unusual thing here is you're wearing a doublet without a shirt underneath it.
Yeah.
Why might that be?
Well, like I said, the main reason for wearing a shirt is because you don't want your expensive doublet to get sweat and things like that on it. Now, in my personal experience of fighting in full armour, whether you're wearing a shirt or not, your doublet is going to be sweaty at the end.
Yeah.
Like, there's no...
So if you're going to get drenched with sweat anyway, then why bother wearing a shirt? Because the shirt's not going to save the doublet anyway.
Yeah.
So I guess by not wearing a shirt, also it's going to be slightly cooler. You're going to, you know, maybe get rid of some of that excess heat
Yes.
from armour a little bit more easily.
Yeah, it's just one less layer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so less bagging, less bunching underneath the armour.
And my understanding is that, so it says, except for a doublet of fustian lined with satin. Now my understanding is the satin makes it easier to take on and off when you've got a sweaty body.
So this is what I've heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've not tried that.
Okay.
The question with any of these medieval texts, everyone is talking. No one's using a standard definition.
Okay.
In my replica, the satin's on the silk is on the outside because I want to show that off. It 100% could be on the inside. What we as reenactors and living historians need to do is test both and work out why did someone feel that it was important that a doublet be made out of both fustian and silk and satin.
And I guess the final point to touch on is cut full of holes. So
Yeah.
the first thing I think of is ventilation when I hear that.
Yeah, that is a very real possibility. Another thing is that unlike a normal doublet, an arming doublet needs to have holes in it so that you can attach your armour to.
Yep.
So I've got holes on my shoulders.
Can we just show that up to so these are called points, which we'll talk a bit more about in a minute, and you can see that there are eyelets through here where the hand stitched eyelets where the cord or point as it's called actually comes through, and that ties to the plate armour, and that's what keeps it where it is.
Yeah, and then I've got some at the bottom as well to attach my leg armour, which was we don't know 100% how prevalent that was, but that's how I attach.
So this is a doublet, but it's also what all of the armour attaches to. So if you want to have your arm harness staying where it should be, you want to have your pauldrons or balders there, you want to have your leg harness not travelling up and down too much but staying put, it needs to be laced to a tightly fitted doublet, and this needs to be tightly fitted therefore, because you don't want a loose garment that moves around, because then your armour would be moving around and wouldn't be in the right place on your body.
So
everything's tight.
My tailor, the seamstress, we can put a link in maybe to contact details for her, but she made this exactly to my measurements, and she knows stuff about my back and shoulders that I have no idea about. She's, you really, it needs to be tight fitting, because otherwise you end up with bunching under your armour, you might not be able to move your arm to the full extent that you need to, and that can be life and death.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, if one part of your armour kind of sags or drifts to somewhere where it shouldn't do, it means that you can't move it in the way that it should move at that moment that you're trying to protect yourself from someone swinging a poleaxe at your head or whatever. So yes, very, very important. Right, shall we move on with the... so it goes on, it says the doublet must be strongly built, the points must be set at the break in the arm, in front and back, to lace the gussets of mail, and must be sewn onto the doublet also at the break in the arm and at the underarm. I mean, that's fairly simple, straightforward stuff. All of the armour gets attached to the doublet, including the mail.
Yeah.
Now remember that in the age of full plate armour, certainly a lot of the gaps between the plates have a mail voider or gusset in them. So for example, on the inside of the bend of the arm, there will be a square, sometimes it can be a whole tube of mail. Equally at the armpit, around the skirt, around here, sometimes up at, well, usually up at the neck, and various other places.
Often on the legs as well.
Back of the knees, and sometimes the entire back of the legs, in fact. So some of those attached to the doublet. So this doublet, despite the fact it's a thin, fairly insubstantial garment without really any padding, is carrying the load of quite a lot of your plate armour and a lot of little bits of mail as well. So it's a very, very important garment. So as I say, despite the fact it's thin, it has to be strong. So the next really interesting point we're going to look at is about arming points, and it says the arming points must be made of fine twine like that which with which men make the strings for crossbows. These points must have tips for lacing, and they must be waxed with leather workers something, not sure of the word, such that they will neither stretch nor break. So
there's one of mine.
So we've already shown you points. They are laces, really, aren't they? The modern world, that we'd call these laces probably, but they were called points. And they have little brass ends on them.
Aglets.
Yeah.
Which
at the end there.
We still use that word for the little plastic ones that you get on your shoelaces.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And they are very like shoelaces, actually, aren't they?
Yeah.
But now, perhaps the most interesting two bits of what it said there.
Yeah.
So these are, just to remind you, these attach the plate armour to the doublet, or indeed the mail to the doublet. Yeah. And the two most important things are that this is made of twine like crossbow bolts are made of. Strings, crossbow strings are made of, and it's waxed.
Yeah.
So
I mean, a crossbow string you don't want to break.
No.
I've not handled many crossbows in my time, but when you're talking about the kind of crossbow that can shoot a bolt, 1,000 plus pounds of force, you're talking about a very strong piece of string there. And
they stay strung, unlike longbows which you de-string. Crossbows stay strung for long amounts of time, and so they're under a lot of tension.
So you're talking about very strong pieces of string attaching these things. Also, these ones, and I think crossbow bolts as well, crossbow strings, woven out of multiple strands, because then if one strand fails, you've still got the other ones holding it together. All of this is about making sure that when you go into battle, you're not going to be let down by your own armour.
Yeah.
And then waxed, almost as bad as a point breaking is a point slipping. So obviously with plate armour, it's got particular places where it can bend and other places where it doesn't bend. And just a change in 1 centimetre can really affect the way that you can move, and can be all the difference between actually being able to move an arm. So if the elbow joint on your armour moves down even just 1 centimetre, that can mean that your arm can't move anymore. Because that's how close it needs to be.
So these little bits of cord that they look like to you are super, super important, because they hold your armour, be it mail or plate, to your doublet. Okay, so you need your doublet to be tight fitting and stay for the different reference points, your shoulder point, for example, to stay there and not move up and down a lot. And this equally needs to stay there and not move up and down a lot, so that your pauldron, which is attached to the outside, doesn't move up and down a lot. So you want these to not stretch, obviously not break. And the other thing about waxing them is, so these pass through holes in the armour and then get tied, don't they? And when they're waxed, they kind of stay tied, don't they?
Yeah.
Which is really useful, because you don't want it to come untied either.
What we always do when we're jousting is we'll do the point, and then 20 minutes later, before we get on the horse, we will check all the points again. Yeah. Because even
they can slip and loosen, and
you don't want them to. And wax points hardly ever slip.
Right.
Hardly ever at all.
And I can feel this, so I'm pulling this, and this has no stretch in it at all. So this is not going to stretch, but equally when you put the two surfaces against each other, because they've got beeswax on them, they just bind and stick to each other, don't they? Out of interest, is it difficult to get them off?
It can be.
Yeah.
Actually, there is a trick to it.
Cut them off.
There is a trick to it, where you just there's one of the things in it, one of the strands in a bow. If you pull that up before pulling it out, then it will come loose.
Right.
So it's
technique.
It's
then.
a technique. Yeah.
Right.
The best squires know this one secret.
Cool. Right, so just going on quickly through this bit of the text, it says, and he should wear a pair of hose made of worsted cloth. Around the knees should be wrapped bulwarks of thin blankets to reduce the chafing by the leg harness. So that's a very interesting thing. Now this is a piece of the text which huge numbers of people I know have talked about over the years. So here we have a piece of blankets, don't we?
Mine. Yeah. So one of the things, like we've kind of alluded to, is that some people disagree on this. Yeah. And that's one of the...
When we were talking off camera before we started making this.
Basically, anything that a medieval writer writes is their opinion. Yeah. We don't have... this isn't...
Not everyone agreed then, and not everyone agrees now.
This isn't the head of the army saying, this is what you should do if you're going to join my army. It's not regulation. This is one guy saying, this worked for me. Yeah. So that's something to bear in mind.
And there are differences of, there's differences of physique, there's differences of context. Are you fighting in a tournament? Are you fighting in war? Are you mounted? Are you on foot? And there's also differences in the armour as well. There's different types of leg harness. Absolutely. So, it was quite common in England, for example, to have fully enclosed upper cuisse or upper legs. So it was fully plated front and back, whereas in Italy, you did sometimes get that, but the typical Italian harness isn't fully closed at the back. It's usually sort of half closed at the back, and then you have an open portion. Yeah. So it might be that this is particular to a certain type of armour.
His own armour.
Or it might be particular to tournament fighting on foot. You might not want to do this on horse for some reason, or you might prefer to do it on horse. Who knows?
Now, one of the things that I would say with this, because I always wear these. Yeah. I never wear my leg armour without these, because, well, I have worn them without it, and that is why I now never wear them without it. Okay. A few benefits to it are it stops the chafing quite so much. My leg armour isn't perfectly fitted to my legs, so this makes that more helpful. Also, my hose are more expensive than a strip of cloth. Yeah. And it's very easy for little cuts to appear near the knee.
You can see in this.
This has had some cuts. That would have been a very expensive pair of hose. Now
ruined.
Ruined. Yeah. So it's got that benefit as well. Yeah. These will last me several years, and then I throw away a piece of cloth rather than a pair of hose. When I first tried this out, I didn't read it properly, and I thought bulwarks of blankets, absolutely. So I got some nice thick wool, thinking if this is padding, the thicker the better. Yeah. And it didn't work as well.
And why did it not work as well?
It was too bulky.
Okay.
It interfered with my my leg harness too much.
Okay.
It was hot. It was uncomfortable.
Okay.
Because you remember, when it goes round your leg, you're increasing the size of your leg
Yeah.
quite a bit. You know, we're talking about mathematically.
So it depends partly on how your armour was fitted to you.
Yeah.
So if you had a big wrapping around your knee and then you had the armour made to fit that, then that would work. But if your armour wasn't made to fit that and you try and jam that underneath, then it won't articulate properly.
But what's important is that the original thing says thin. He specifies thin.
Right.
So
yeah, thin blankets. Yeah.
So yeah, when trying these things out, we need to measure twice and cut once.
Yeah.
You know, don't just read it and go, oh yeah, great, I'm going to go and get some wool.
Yeah.
And make assumptions. Look at it really.
The other thing I've wondered, because I've been familiar with that particular bit of text for many years, and the other thing I've wondered is if it also has a degree of keeping the leg harness where it's supposed to be as well, because by putting that band essentially around the knee, so for anyone who doesn't know, your upper leg harness is secured to the bottom usually of your doublet. You can sometimes use a paw point or various forms of belt type system, but usually it's attached to something up here, but it still has mass to it, and that pulls down at the bottom edge of whatever you're suspending it from. So if you can have the cuisse tight around the thigh and around the knee, then it helps take some of that, spread some of that mass out, doesn't it? So if you can have something that helps it grip a bit better at the knee, I think that's probably a good thing, isn't it?
And obviously, as well, as you get older, your body will change shape a little bit and things like that. And being able to pad out those areas, which, you know, you can wrap it around a couple of extra times or something like that, just to get the fit perfect in a harness. You know, my harness I had made for me 12 years ago now. Yeah. So
and not only does an individual change shape, but not all harness was custom made, and not all harness. Some harness was inherited. So very often we see wills and inventories where all sorts of bits of armour were handed down a generation because someone had died, and it's entirely possible that in some cases people were wearing their dad's leg armour, and it maybe was a little bit bigger at the knee than they needed,
or possibly more likely, you know, your dad's armour gets handed to you, and because it's not fashionable, it goes into the armoury for some of your retained men to wear. But it's the same issue, isn't it? That, like, you know, the older armour is probably not fitting whoever's wearing it right now.
But we're not saying that these are necessarily likely explanations, but they're possible extra kind of.
They're not necessarily the explanation that for him there, because you know. And then you've got sieges. Yep. You know, your body shape is going to change an awful lot if you're not eating in 2 weeks.
Or if it's a really boring siege and you're eating and drinking every night. So, sounds like a good siege. So I think the headline of these that we've picked out 3, I think, really interesting and significant points mentioned in this source. And I think the headline is, you must remember, like with any historical source, what is the context of it? Is there bias? This is only one person's point of view. You know, talking about the context, we don't know really. This is probably for tournament on foot, but you know, it could be, some of this advice could transfer over to war, some of it could be to other scenarios as well. But it's a fascinating and rare source. We're incredibly lucky to have it, and I think the more people that look at this and analyse this and try this in living history, in HEMA, you know, different types of reenactment, jousting, even sort of full contact HMB type stuff, I think we might get closer by triangulating. We might get closer to some of the answers to some of the questions we have. Yeah,
and I think, again, just to reiterate, there were people in the period that probably picked this up and went, "This guy's an idiot." I disagree with most of this. You only need to look at the comment section down below and you will probably find a disagreement about something. And that doesn't mean that one person is right or wrong, but in their experience, one thing is more important to them.
And we never really know whether something here is unusual or common or, you know, so there we go. Make of it what you will, but it's a fascinating source. We're very lucky to have it. Thanks to Zach for inspiring me to do this video actually, and pulling out the text for it, and thanks for hosting, and I hope to see you again soon on the channel.
I'd love to do some more.
And go and check out the link below to Zach's channel as well, and we'll see you again soon.
See you guys.
Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.